Thanks, everybody. Thanks for the jazz hands, I assume. This presentation has next to nothing to do with our current situation because I wrote it before all this happened, and I thought it would be good if I left it that way because we all see enough news coming through our feeds online and Twitter and whatnot. So let's take a little break. I will warn you, there are many, many pop cultural references in this presentation. If you don't get them all, don't feel bad. If you do get them all, maybe Kim can send you a Creative Mornings mug as a prize or something. Here we are. So, again, thanks for being here. Thanks for joining me here in our new future where we all get to eat Dippin' Dots, and my highly advanced AI-powered chatbot will be handling the rest of the presentation for me. No, that's not true. Now, since we're here to talk about identity and what makes us us and whatnot, I'm aware that a few of you actually do know me, or so you think, in real life. And regular attendees of Creative Mornings Omaha might recognize me from skulking about before our meetings and guzzling coffee, or from this lovely headshot that always accompanies my registration. Unfortunately, I was unable to use Photoshop in real time right now. And some of you might be joining us from outside the greater Omaha core maze, and you may know me from, as Steve said, my Twitter account where I spout creativity-themed aphorisms under the guise of sentient facial hair. Now, the rest of you may have no idea who I really am, beyond what Steve just said, but you nonetheless might have a sense that you've seen me somewhere before, a sort of deja vu for middle-aged Midwestern white dudes. And the thing is, you're not wrong. You probably have seen me before, going all the way back to my youth, when I became famous for my time as a teenage surgeon, which was quickly followed by becoming a teenage burnout. I then attempted to become a Marvel superhero and failed. I then briefly tried my hand as a news anchor, but I got fired from that one, which stung, it really did. I felt a little bit lost at that point, so I headed to Nepal and became a raider of lost antiquities. I kind of let myself go a little bit there, but I finally got my act together and decided to try my hand at NASCAR. I think I'm on the left in that picture, or maybe the right. I forget. Anyway, my success in driving in circles at 200 miles an hour led the good folks at People magazine to, of course, name me their sexiest man alive. Now, obviously, the only place to go from there was into the most glamorous of all the industries, advertising, which naturally qualifies me to speak on weighty philosophical issues like identity, following in the footsteps of other great ad industry metaphysicists like Ernie the Elf, Chester Cheetah, and of course the wisest of all the oracles, Mrs. Butterworth. In reality, I'm here because of my mom, obviously, but not in that way. And a side note, that is me. During the 6-month period I wore glasses. I'm also sporting a non-licensed Bud Light, non-Bud Light labeled Spuds McKinsey t-shirt because that's how cool I was when I was 15. Anyway, my mom, who I believe is online with us today, once said, and by once I mean repeatedly for the last 25 years, "You are not your job." I just happened to mention this during a Creative Mornings planning meeting last summer when we were discussing possible speakers, and well, here we are. Thanks, Kim and Steve. Now, it took me a good long while to believe my mom's admonition. Basically, I was forced to believe it, because if it wasn't true, if I really was just the aggregate of what I do, working in the creative arts, even or especially the commercial ones, would have sent me to the metaphorical showers long ago. Because while I've had some definite high points in my career, things I'm proud to be associated with, the things that I've created, I've also been gut punched on a fairly regular basis, sometimes by my own hand, and other times, I've been lied to, laid off, passed over, ghosted, and given the shaft, sometimes on the same day, from the same place. I should have listened to my mom's other advice and become a brain surgeon. There'd have been less pressure and more cool spells. And also, I think at this point we can all agree that deep fakes can be super, super creepy. And discovering my mom's advice to be true raised some real issues, because if I'm not, at least to a certain significant degree, the sum of what I do, of what I create and achieve, what am I? Who am I? What part of me is really unalterable, foundational, unchangeable? Yes, if you actually bothered to read the title slide, immutable. And in the end, does it even matter? I don't mean to shock you, but yes, I would argue, it does. In the most common terms, identity is how we generally present ourselves to the world. And that's just as often an unconscious expression as it is, like Austin here, supremely conscious. And like many things in life, that can be both good and bad, depending on the day, date, and temperature. But more importantly, our identity is one of, if not the main lenses through which we see others and we see the world. It colors everything coming into our brains, being analyzed by our brains, and being output by our often overactive mouths, especially when said mouths are actually our fingers. Which led me to deduce that if you were to adopt, assume, or cultivate a, shall we say, substandard identity, one built on lies either about yourself or others or the world in general, all of which are yours for the asking on social media, you'll see the world in ways that might be interesting, or intriguing, or infuriating, or frankly quite depressing, but not necessarily true. And what truth you do find will probably be incomplete. A puzzle with half or three-quarters of the pieces missing. And yes, I did my best to find the worst possible puzzle piece stock photo I could find. Notice the extra hand. So, anyway, you've got a puzzle with a substantial number of pieces missing, and you don't even know how many pieces you're supposed to have. So guess what? Well, welcome to The Matrix, which is an awesome film, and the sequels, not so much. But it's no way to live, at least not for me. I mean, go nuts if that's your thing. It's a free-ish country for now. But I'm a foundational truth kind of guy. There's enough squishiness in life to deal with as it is, and I'd rather not have the core of my being relegated to having the structural integrity of a stress ball. I want to know what all the pieces are, so I can at least attempt to put them together. Now, even though I've been thinking about identity in one way or another for most of my life, it's generally been rather haphazardly and amorphously. So I don't have some Frodo Baggins-like journey of self-discovery to share with you, although you're all welcome to act like a hobbit and have a second breakfast at any time. Instead, I've attempted to coalesce all the observations I've made over the long, long years, as well as these last few months, and, as Butterworth, as my co-pilot, offer some cogent thoughts on where I believe my true identity really lies. Spoiler alert, I'm Batman. No, sadly, I'm not Batman, unless Batman drives a Volkswagen and is easily winded. Now, after much study and reflection and generally making up stuff, as us writers are prone to do, I settled on the idea that most of us derive a great deal of our identities from three main areas. Then, after spending way too much time trying to separate those areas into distinct categories, or for those who work in corporate America and love jargon, buckets, I realized they overlap so much that it was all just kind of pointless. Nonetheless, because I do care about you, the home viewer, I've attempted to create some semblance of structure for my thoughts, but still, you're the ones voluntarily listening to a copywriter wax philosophical about core existential ideas. I know, right? I will offer a disclaimer that obviously I'm skipping over many issues related to identity because unlike these guys, we don't have, 12 semesters to study this. We all have lives to live, even if they're fairly self-contained at this point, and our time today is short. So that being said, let's start with where we often and instinctively draw pieces of our identity from, our families. This is my mom's side of the family, circa 1980. And it's just natural that, as kids, our first identity is formed by and through our relationship with the people who raise us. In my case, being ultra-Midwestern and whatnot, those people would be my mom and dad. Now, my mom you already kind of sort of met. She gave me my hair and a love of processed foods. But I'm also a PK. No, not a preacher's kid. See my dad's sweet mustache? Oh, you guessed right. I was and I am a policeman's kid, which frankly is way cooler. Growing up, I absolutely loved the fact that my dad was a cop, or as my mom called him, a piece of fuzz. You think your dad could beat up my dad, Mr. Playground Bully? My dad could arrest your dad. I once even started using my dad could shoot your dad and get away with it, but that was highly frowned upon even in the loosey-goosey days that were the early 80s. Now, some people cling, and I do mean cling, to their, shall we say, ancestral familial identities throughout their lives. Maybe it's just too hard to let go when they've witnessed their father's murder and vowed revenge upon a six-fingered man. Or they come from one of those families that uses summer as a verb and speaks like this. I don't know. But most of us tend to relegate familial identity to a smaller role as we grow up and begin associations outside our own bloodline, which I know is hard if you're from Kearney, but what can you do? Besides, it would be super awkward and exceptionally weird to be on a conference call and taunt a client with the fact that my dad could cuff and stuff their dad. So what was once the primary source of my identity cannot remain that through my whole life. It's just not enough. It changes too much. But just because we outgrow being known as, in my case, John and Mern's boy, doesn't mean we automatically leave family as a primary driver of our identity behind. Often after a brief period of shenanigans, we start our own families. and derive chunks of our identities from them. I love being a husband and a dad, despite the effects of the latter on my blood pressure. And God willing, I'll get to call these nuts my sons and daughter until the day I drop. But my relationship with my kids will change substantially over the years. Right now, I'm a provider and protector, sometimes a teacher, often a referee. I used to be a grumbly chauffeur, not so much anymore, and every parent's favorite, a reluctant ATM. But my kids are 12, 12, and 10, and their great grandma there is 101 and doing great, thank you. So you do the math. In the not so distant future, the only role I should be playing for my kids is advisor. And with any luck, they'll become my ATMs in my dotage. But unless I want empty nest syndrome to spiral into empty soul despair, I best not draw too much of who I am from those I help spawn. And I think we all know a few parents for whom this is a real issue, like Bob over there in Des Moines. That's a joke. There is no Bob from Des Moines, I hope. Besides, even introverts like myself live in a communal world, current circumstances notwithstanding, and at some point, hopefully prior to said spawning, we started expanding our circles and drawing pieces of our identities from outside our families. And that's right, from our peer groups. This was easier and to a certain extent mandatory in junior high and high school. Go Wildcats. Sometimes these groups formed around a personality trait, the wallflowers, for example, and other times around activities, band geeks, drama nerds, orchestra snobs, jocks, the AV club. Often, and remember I said these categories flowed around and into each other, it was a combination of the two with a bit of family background tossed in. The popular kids from the good part of town who played football or starred in Bring It On the Musical, as all the high school movie tropes go. So maybe you ended up being a brain, or an athlete, or a basket case, or a princess, or a criminal, or perhaps like me, a smooth criminal. Actually, I gave up being an athlete, playing baseball, to become a band geek and a general purpose nerd. And my notes say I'm supposed to insert a joke here about not getting married until the age of 30. Well, that's just rude to myself. Anyway, hopefully most of us, unlike Uncle Rico, didn't peak in high school. Even if we still partake of some of the activities we enjoyed then, music, sports, other forms of partaking, you know who you are, we've attached ourselves into other more mature groups of peoples. The folks who volunteer with at the shelter, or the Rotary Club, or even your very special candle-making society. And of course, our jobs, at least from a community standpoint. Pick your pleasure. But by and large, these associations are, unlike school, voluntary and activity-based. And we often start drawing no small amount of our identity story, both from these activities, not unlike how we do with our jobs, and from the people who are co-participants. For example, once upon a time, I was into mountain biking, what's known as XC, or cross-country single track, to be exact. I bought the clothes, I read the magazines, I put a rack in my car, I fell down a lot. I got the scars, and I adopted the jargon of mountain biking because I was a mountain biker, and that was cool. Same thing happened when I took up golf, and the guitar, and when I got into cars, and computers, and grilling. And once again, using those groups and activities for bits and pieces of my identity is fine. But from a foundational perspective, they left much to be desired. After all, life hits you hard, bro, and the things that were once important to you can shift very, very quickly, as they have now, or gradually even. For instance, after a series of moves, having kids, and growing weary of falling down, I stopped mountain biking. In fact, I just converted my bike to an electric drivetrain. And I've played golf twice since our twins were born, 12 years ago. I'm still not a very good guitar player, although I've recently added drums to my repertoire of mediocrity. I am still a gearhead, a techhead, and a meathead, but the aforementioned fatherhood leaves less and less time for all those things, and for the people with whom I do them, which in a very real way can be sad. But those losses aren't compounded by feeling like my identity is being stripped away, assuming, of course, I don't allow it to feel that way. Now let's revisit work for a moment. Let's assume that I said earlier about getting Chuck Norrised by the industry never happened. Career has been on the upswing from day one, and everything's coming up Millhouse. Would that matter? Yes, and that it would have taken me much, much longer to reach the conclusion that it shouldn't matter. You follow? For some of us, our work is deeply personal. For better or worse, we chose a career path that exploits one of our fundamental talents and even sources of enjoyment. Whether or not that was a wise decision is a subject for another talk, not by me. I'm a creative writer and an all-around problem solver. I like doing what I do for clients who pay me, for myself, for friends as a favor, yada yada. And while I can take a break from writing, I cannot make a break from writing, or creative problem solving, or trying to see different ways of approaching sticky wickets. It's just what I do. It's how my brain works. But what if I couldn't do those things? Ooh, excuse me. What if, after this shindig, I tempt fate and go outside to walk Fletcher the noble beast, and as I step off the curb, I get whacked by this distancing scofflaw, and I suffer a head injury. An injury whose only lasting effect is to more or less give me a permanent creative block. I can't turn a phrase. Attempts at alliteration leave me apoplectic. I can only see things from the perspectives on which they are presented to me. The angles vanish. Connections between seemingly incongruent but actually related cultural references, they no longer form. I can't even approve upon what passes for poetry in a drugstore birthday card. Who am I then? Who am I if I haven't taken my mom's advice to heart? Who am I when things completely and irrevocably come undone? Hint, I still ain't Batman. Now, you may have noticed that I haven't mentioned a fairly major category that a lot of people, they tend to draw no small amount of their identities from. Politics. No, no, no. I mean, well, yes, some people do this, it's true, but I'm not diving into that cesspool today. Politics are important. I advise everyone to be at least somewhat engaged in what's going on. But if your mood changes at the drop of a politico's or pundit's tweet or certain president's, it may be time for a period of deep introspection, especially if you're quarantined with other people and you don't want to make them miserable. Instead, I'm talking about religion, because that's so much safer than politics. Ever since I was a tweener smart aleck pondering such things, I believe that everyone adheres to a religion, because your religion is just a set of beliefs you follow every day, whether they come from a sacred text, a self-help book, your social tribe, or possibly just your own unspoken predilections. It matters not as far as definitions go. We all have our beliefs, and we all try to follow them. So are my beliefs, my religion, my real identity? I'm a Christian. I haven't been a Christian for my entire life, but now it's kind of long enough that it feels that way. And on a certain level, it seems that if I really, really do believe what I claim to believe, that Christian should be placed at the core of what makes up this being known as JFRO. But I don't think it is. Not quite. The term Christian means follower of Christ. I am the follower, which means I have to act. I have to literally follow. I can choose not to follow, and in fact I have done just that on more occasions than I would probably care to admit. Often it's just me being neglectful or lazy. Sometimes I may choose to ignore doing what I know I should. Sometimes I'm just distracted by whatever shiny thing the culture throws into my field of view, and sometimes, well, sometimes it's just my 20s. The point is, I can lay that identity aside and walk away, for as long as I care to. So that part of my identity, like all the others I've mentioned today, can be taken away, even if I'm the only person who can take it away. But so that still doesn't make it strong enough to rest my soul upon or to build my life around. Not for me, at least. But it's close. That's probably not so shocking. There's a phrase that's often used in Christian circles, one I've naturally heard for years, but never used in a way that made it seem any different than just calling myself a Christian. It was just a synonym, not a separate idea, and the concept of it being a separate idea is something I only came to fully understand within the last 18 months or so. And that is, I'm a child of God. Literally, and no matter what. Just like my own kids, who will always be my kids, even if they, heaven forbid, turn their backs on the Chiefs and become Broncos fans. Okay, that is highly unlikely, but it could happen, and they would still be my kids. There ain't nothing they can do to separate themselves from my love. My approval? Yes. My money? Definitely. But my love? Never. No way, and no how. So even when I stumble, or fail, or become successful in all the wrong ways, or if I walk away and say, no thanks, not today, this, that, wherever it is on the screen, is still me. It's still who I am. Because as the song says, there's no power of hell, no scheme of man, can ever pluck me from his hand. It's not considered an enlightened way of thinking anymore. It's certainly a less popular way of thinking than it has been, especially inside the ad industry. But try as I might to figure out that it's wrong, and I could not. And so I'm going with it. Final answer. Here's what it comes down to. You can be encouraging, indifferent, or antagonistic. You can label me insightful, insipid, or ignorant. You can call me a fool, a joker, a smoker, a midnight toker, an idiot, feeble-minded, vacuous, unlearned, undiscerning, gullible, weak, blind, or bizarre. A disgrace to the legacy of Butterworth. But even if every one of you were to email me, at me, or troll me, and tell me I'm wrong on every possible level, well, that would be pretty rude, frankly, and not in the spirit of Creative Mornings. But it wouldn't matter, because that sting would fade. But this is enough. Even if the work slows down, even if work goes away completely, which it has, or I get sick, which I haven't, or someone I love suddenly becomes a doubt point. Even if everything else just flat out falls apart, this is enough. It's actually more than enough. It's everything. Because the great I am is everything that I am, and that, as I'm sure my mom will agree, is a very, very good thing. Thank you. And here's where you can find me online. Yes, I do have a website called whoisjasonfox.com. It's a bit of a coincidence. I've had it since 1996. So if you're bored and want to waste way too much time with a timeline of my life that is nothing but lies and jokes, there you go. And I will now unshare. Thank you.
All right, great job, Jason. So thank you for that. We have time for questions and answers. So if you have a question you want to ask and you want to speak, raise your hand and John is going to be watching for you and he'll kind of call on you and unmute you. You can also put your questions in the chat and we'll get those to Jason. So fire away. Anybody have any questions?
I'm going to jump in real quick and ask Jason if he has ever recorded an audiobook, because that was absolutely brilliant, man.
Thank you. I have not. I have done a little bit of voiceover, mainly for radio spots that I've written myself. But I've done so many scratch tracks for radio because I'm in advertising and I've done several hundred radio spots that people either really like my voice when I do that or they really don't. So if I can make a living at it, that would be fantastic. But
you should seriously consider it, man. Like, that
thank you. I
was
appreciate
absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Thank you, sir.
Here's a question from Terry. Can you share some about all the public service work you've done, doing good in our community?
I guess all the public service work I've done would be my work for the Ronald McDonald House here in town. I don't know if Ann is on here this month. She just had a baby, so she might not be on here this time. But a couple of years ago, I headed up, or co-headed up, the Public Service Committee for the Ag Club here in town, AAF Omaha. And we chose the Ronald McDonald House because they were about 10 months away from their grand reopening of their big expansion. And that grand reopening happened last May. So we took that opportunity to give them a new brand, a new tone of voice, did a sitelet, basically gave them a lot of tone of voice and materials they could use marketing themselves, which went really well. We're very, very proud of that, and they're still using that today. So that's here in town. I've done pro bono work through the years. It's been fun. But
there's another question. Where to go from Pamela? Jason, do you ever present live from stage?
I have a couple of times in the past. Right after we moved to Omaha, I actually spoke at Meet the Pros. So I'd been here about 4 or 5 months and spoke there. So that was, I don't know, several hundred design students and teachers and other folks there. I've done smaller groups around, so yes, it's just I don't get asked to all that often, but I do have that experience. Maybe someday someone will pay me to do it because everything I've done so far has been for free.
All right, there's a question from David Moore.
Jason.
David Moore?
Yeah, you know. Jason, tell the folks here who don't know who Lee Clow is and tell us a brief story of your opportunity to meet the man.
Okay, for those who aren't in advertising, which I believe is most people, Lee Clow is one of the greatest art directors and creative directors in the ad industry. He retired about a year and a half ago. He worked for Chiat Day out in Los Angeles. He's the man responsible for the Macintosh 1984 commercial, almost all of Apple's advertising since the dawn of time, as well as great campaigns for Pedigree dog food. Also many others. So back in 2009, I was on my own yet again. Twitter had finally kind of come of age, and I decided I should be involved on Twitter in case clients wanted a social media presence. I didn't want to just use my own name because no one cared what a kid in Texas writing. I was in Dallas at the time. Kid in Texas writing from his bedroom had to say. So I looked around for kind of something to parody almost, and I ended up with Lee because no one ever says anything bad about Lee. I've even met people who worked for Lee and they don't have anything bad to say about him, which is very, very rare within the industry. And Lee has always had a beard. I think he was born with a beard. That's what he's known for. So I decided, well, what if over the years things Lee said fell out and got stuck in his beard? Well, I'll make those things up and put them online. And it kind of took off. And about a year and a half into it, I bugged their ECD of the LA office, who's now the CEO of the New York office, Rob Schwartz, and asked him if Lee knew what his beard was up to and did he care. And he said, no, Lee loves it as long as you're not a jerk to anybody. Keep on doing it. And who are you? Because I hadn't told anybody it was me. It was a big secret. So I told him who I was, told him the story. They flew me out to Venice. We had lunch. Lee had left a meeting with Steve Jobs that day to have lunch with me. So it was all very surreal. It was one of these things that's not like the other. And I'm that thing that's not like the other. We decided to make a book. The book took a couple of years to actually produce. You can still find it on Amazon, but it's out of print, so it's going to be a used copy if it's out there. It's just search for Lee Clow's beard, one word. I've been doing it. I'm on a hiatus right now, but I've done 2,500 of these little sayings about creativity and advertising. Often they apply to life outside of advertising. So it's just been something I keep rolling. People seem to appreciate it. I have some famous followers who I think believe I'm actually Lee, but such is life. I'll take it. That's the almost short version.
We had a question from Gail. Have you done much comedic writing in your advertising work, or is it more personal?
Most of it, I would say, is comedic. Even the serious stuff, I put a little humor into it because most brands can use a certain level of humor because people relate to it. If everything's overly earnest, it gets a bit wearing, and that's actually really, really hard to do. I'm sure all of you have gotten 18,000 emails from companies who are very concerned about your ability to handle the crisis without them, even though you haven't bought anything from them in 16 years. That's too much. That's just going a little bit overboard there. So most of my stuff has at least a hint of comedy. Some of it's outright funny. Some of it is. I've done some pro bono work for the United Way that doesn't have humor in it because that would be very, very awkward. So yeah, it's a range. It's a spectrum, really. Thanks, Miguel.
Aubrey sent out a link of one of your radio spots, Jason, that uses your voice, I guess. So everybody can click on that.
It must be Ronald McDonald House. I did the radio and used my voice for that because I was free. I am available for projects.
Couple more in here. Jasmine says, do you have any tips for designers trying to develop their personal identity? How do we rifle through these buckets and present them in an authentic and interesting way? Oh,
wow. That's a big question, Jasmine. At some point, if you've been doing it, if you're new to the business, it's harder because you might not really be sure of what your style is and what you kind of lean towards as far as the type of work you want to do. If you've been doing a while, you can probably look at your past work and realize this is what I do, this is what I like to say, these are the type of projects I want to work on, and you can position yourself that way. I'm not super into personal branding as one of the, everyone needs a personal brand. Everyone has a personal brand, but that's who you are. So as long as you're authentic and real about that, you will attract the type of folks that you want to work with, assuming you're good. Hope that helps, but feel free to email me or contact me for something that makes more sense.
And there's another question from Ben. What are you doing to stay creative in this current environment?
I've been working on this. I had one project to wrap up. That wasn't the most creative project in the world, so I wasn't particularly sad to see that go. Now that this is done, I've got one project, but it's probably not coming for 2 or 3 weeks. So I don't know. try to write. I'll try to polish up some of my personal stuff, maybe revive some scripts, maybe harass people like you into filming shorts if you're up to it. I've got several short screenplays that are delightful. As my wife says, start learning piano because she teaches piano. Thanks, sweetie. She does teach online if anybody wants to learn piano.
Good job, Jason.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, great job.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, dude, that was brilliant. That was the coolest morning wake up audiobook I've ever had.
Good job,
Thanks.
Jason.